Sometimes the best way to understand a huge, sweeping story, like the very beginning of a nation, is to zoom way, way in, to look at just one family. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to follow the lives of Robert and Elizabeth Seaver. Now, they were ordinary people, but their story, well, it tells us so much about the entire early American experience. So let's just ask the big question right up front. What does it actually take to build a new world from scratch? I mean, really think about that. We're going to follow their journey and see firsthand what it meant to just start over, to face these unbelievable hardships and somehow lay the foundation for a future they probably couldn't even picture.
All right, so let's meet the two people at the heart of our story. First up, you've got Robert Seaver. He's a young guy from England. Shows up in 1634, probably looking to make his mark, right? And then there's Elizabeth Ballard. She got there a year earlier, and her situation was a bit different. She was a maidservant. So they're coming from totally different starting points, but their paths are about to collide in this brand new, rough-and-tumble settlement of Roxbury, Massachusetts.
And their story really kicks off, like so many others, with a journey across a massive ocean. We have to picture the scene here. It's the 1630s. This is the absolute peak of the Puritan Great Migration. Thousands upon thousands of people are making this incredible decision to leave everything they've ever known behind, all for a shot at something new.
For Robert, this was a very deliberate move. He's born in England back in 1608, and then, around age 26, he makes it official. He takes the oaths of allegiance, gets on a ship, and by that summer, boom, he's in Roxbury, already putting down roots. This wasn't some whim, This was a conscious choice. I'm going to build a life in a new world.
And this is what I find so cool about Elizabeth's story. Our first real introduction to her isn't on some dusty ship's manifest. It's through the words of her own community. The local church records say she led a godly conversation. Now, that sounds a little formal to us, but back then, that was a huge deal. It meant she was seen as deeply pious, well-respected, a genuinely good person. That was high praise for sure.
And just like that, these two separate paths merge into one. It happens fast. Robert and Elizabeth get married in December 1634. I mean, that's just a few months after he even got off the boat. And from that moment on, everything changes. They're not just settlers trying to survive anymore. No, they're builders. They're actively creating a family, a home, a whole life for themselves in this brand new society.
And wow, did their family grow fast. 7 kids in about 10 years. But looking at this, you really get a sense of both the incredible joy and the absolute crushing sorrow of that era. You see the excitement, twins, but then you see the brutal reality of infant mortality. They lose their daughter Hannah when she's just a toddler, and then they name another daughter Hannah, only to lose her too, at just 3 years old. It's just heartbreaking.
So at the same time their family is growing, Robert's own standing in the community is on the rise. In 1637, he becomes what they called a freeman. And you got to understand, this was way more than just a title. It was like getting your all-access pass to civic life. It meant you were a church member in good standing, and, this is the big part, it gave you the right to vote and even hold public office. He wasn't on the outside looking in anymore. He was a full-fledged member of the community.
And he didn't just sit back with this new status. He dove right in. He wasn't on the sidelines at all. He was in the thick of it. We see him serving as a constable, a bailey, and eventually a selectman. I mean, that was a huge deal. He was one of only 5 guys basically running the whole town. People trusted him to handle their money, to make sure the bridges were safe, to organize the town watch. This is exactly how you build a solid reputation.
And you know what comes with that kind of reputation? Success. Get this, by 1652, Robert, the guy who showed up with probably next to nothing, had managed to acquire over 60 acres of land. We're talking his house, pastures, valuable marshland, the whole shebang. This was a serious amount of property, and it absolutely cemented his family's place in Roxbury.
This next bit gives you such a great insight into his character. So, there was this law, right? The half-a-mile law. It said you had to build your house close to the meeting house, mainly for safety. While Robert built his a little too far out. But instead of just packing up and moving, he gets together with a few neighbors and they actually petitioned the government to let them stay, and they won. It just shows you he had this independent, pioneering spirit. He was always pushing the boundaries just a little bit.
Okay, but we have to remember, life in the 17th century was relentlessly tough. And just when it seems like they've built this incredible life from scratch, a series of absolutely devastating trials hits the Seaver family. And these events would test their resilience to the absolute breaking point.
The first blow was just profound. In 1657, Elizabeth dies.
the matriarch of this whole family. Suddenly, Robert is a widower. He's left with 5 kids to raise on his own, the youngest only 12. The person who he'd built this entire world with was just gone.
Then, years later, disaster strikes again. And this account from the church records is just so vivid. It feels like you're right there. Picture this. A maid goes into an upper room. Her candle gets too close to the thatched roof, and the whole thing just goes up in flames. The house that Robert had spent nearly 40 years building burned to the ground. Gone.
And here's the kicker. He was 65 years old. Just let that sink in. At an age when most people are thinking about slowing down, Robert Seaver has lost everything and has to start all over again, literally from the ashes. The kind of resilience that takes, it's just staggering to think about.
And if you can believe it, it gets worse. As if losing his wife and his home wasn't enough. Just 2 years later, the entire region explodes into the chaos of King Philip's War. This was a brutal, terrifying conflict. It wasn't some distant battle. It brought violence and fear right to the doorstep of pretty much every family in New England. And that included the Seavers.
And this war brought the most terrible kind of tragedy imaginable. Robert's son, Nathaniel, was killed in the fighting. I mean, just think of the losses this man has endured. 2 baby daughters, his wife, Elizabeth, his home, and now he has to bury a grown son killed in this brutal war that was just tearing their entire world apart. But here's the amazing part. Despite all of this, all this unimaginable loss, Robert's story does not end in tragedy. He did more than just endure. He spent his final years laser-focused on one thing, making sure the family that he and Elizabeth had built would be secure. He was cementing their legacy.
And you can see how clever he was by looking at his will. So he had this really valuable piece of salt marsh, super important for farming, but he knew one part of it was better than the other, and that could easily lead to his sons fighting over it. So what does he do? He comes up with this brilliant system. The sons have to literally swap their sections of the marsh every single year. It's so simple, but so smart. It's a practical way to guarantee fairness and keep the peace in the family long after he's gone.
So, at the end of it all, what did this life amount to in material terms? Well, when Robert finally died in 1683, at 75 years old, his estate was valued at over £430. Now, that might not sound like a ton of money to us, but for that time, that was an impressive fortune. It's a real, tangible measure of the life he built up from scratch.
Now let's break down what that actually looked like. Just the rebuilt house, the barn, and the orchard were worth £90 by themselves. Then you add in all the pastures, the other lots, that clever salt marsh. You see, this wasn't just a list of assets. This was the foundation. This was security. This was the wealth he was passing on to the next generation.
And maybe this is the real testament to the life that Robert and Elizabeth built together. After all the hardship, all the tragic loss, look what happened to their 4 surviving kids. They all lived these remarkably long lives, especially for the 17th century. We're talking into their 70s, their 80s. One of them almost made it to 90. They didn't just survive, they thrived. And that's a direct result of the stable foundation their parents worked so hard and sacrificed so much to create.
So no, you're not going to find the names Robert and Elizabeth Seaver in most history books. They weren't famous, but their story, this story of courage and loss and incredible hard work and thinking about the future, that's the story of countless families who built a new world, one little piece at a time. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of our stories today actually began generations ago with a journey just like theirs?